Hello and welcome to the Bearded Gamers. I'm Dan, and this is build mode, in which we are building an awesome Marvel Crisis Protocol miniatures game table, which features a dockyard scene. So, this video I'm going to show you how to pimp up these awesome terrain kits from TT Combat, as well as filling in some water effects. So, actually going to create the sea, put some foliage in the seabed, fill it with some resin, and hopefully, when all this is painted and on the table, it's going to look pretty banging. So, let's get to it, shall we? Now, all of these kits from TT Combat are absolutely awesome as is, but we're going for a little extra realism when it comes to our board. So what we're going to do is going to kind of pimp up the models and make them even better, add a few more sort of free dimensions to them to make them stand out more on the tabletop. So I'm going to start off by doing both the dock crane and the ship. You can see here I've got these really cool 3D doors. Now, these also supplied by TT Combat. You can get them on their website. What these can do is, obviously, if you have a look at the kit here, we can pop these in to give them a more sort of 3D effect. The other main thing that I'm going to do is go around all of the sort of metal work and riveting on here, adding cardboard strips and then adding rivets on to give it, again, a more 3D effect. And the boat itself at the front here, obviously, because these are sort of flat packed MDF kits, it's made by a series of layers of flat MDF. So what we can do is we can use some filler just to cover over this and smooth it off to give it a nice rounded finish. And we're going to do something similar to the actual crane itself. You can see it's got loads of metal work and sort of rivets and stuff over here that we can sort of pimp up and make even look even better. So let's get cracking. So I started out by marking out loads of 4mm marks using a ruler on some A4 card. This A4 card is about 250 GSM. Cut that out on a guillotine. It was then that I realised, obviously, that my guillotine has a ruler on it, so I didn't even have to mark it out. But ended up with loads of strips like this. I previously covered the front of the ship in some filler, so now that was dry, I could just sand that down to get a lovely smooth finish on that. Much better than having the separated lines. Then got me some PVA glue, got my strips, and the kit has these sort of lovely riveted areas all already sort of marked out by the laser cut, but obviously we wanted to make it more 3D. So I'm using those strips that we've cut and some PVA glue and sticking those over all of the edging to create kind of the impression of metal kind of strips, or metal areas along the sides and around all the sort of details of the ship. So get all those done up and it will look pretty sweet. At this point I didn't really measure the lengths of it, just use a sharp craft knife and cut it as you go, makes it a lot easier. So I bought a bunch of half beads off eBay. Here you can see I've got 1, 2 and 3mm half beads. Now these are only like £1 each off eBay for 1,000, so really inexpensive way of doing cool rivets. I just again put more PVA down and then used a damp brush to pick up the rivets because they are small, very fiddly to do with a hand, but I found if you just wet the brush a little bit, the friction of the water would pick it up and then you could sort of put it into place where you wanted it. And here you go, this is that whole front of the ship section with all the rivets. Just measure them out, space them out however you want. Don't go overboard, don't do millions, but make it look realistic. I think it looks pretty cool. So I did the same thing on the back of the ship, and this is what it looks like. I also filled in the bottom level of this part with card, so I wasn't going to be going in there. And then these are the resin doors from TT Combat that we're just going to super glue into place. My favourite super glue is the Gorilla Super Glue Gel. Nice and thick, and it doesn't run everywhere, so it keeps it nice and simple. I then wanted to add some details to the front of the ship as well, so I've got some metal nails here, I've got some jeweler's chain, and these little hooks that I think are for jewelers. I got them from Hobbycraft. I then took the nails and super glued one of the little hoops around the top.
And then what I'm going to do is hammer those into the front of the ship around the left and right hand side, and as they go further back I'm going to reduce the height, so we end up with something like this. Then what we need to do is obviously feed the chain through, and that's going to hang a little bit down the side as well. This bit was quite fiddly. I've got big chubby fingers. You can of course use tweezers or something like that as well. I just did the best I could, but I'm pretty pleased with it. I also sort of left the chain hanging a little bit between each one. I think that added some weight to it and made it a little more realistic, but this looks to me like what a front of a ship should look like. So there we have the two main pieces of the ship done now, all with the 3D elements. I'm just going to do exactly the same thing to the dock crane. So this again took a little bit more time, lots of card work on there with the metal bits, lots more rivets, so just keep at it and it'll look sweet. Right, on to the painting. So I made sure all the parts were sealed and then gave them some prime. So I've used mostly a grey primer on the inside and then a black primer on the outside, because they were going to form the basis of the colours or a foundation. The back of the ship is going to be white, so I did the grey, did the white from above, just give it some light sort of zenithal shadows, and then I sprayed the whole thing with a gloss varnish. Now that will come into play when we start adding the weathering and washes and stuff later. So I'm going to start by using some of the craft paint that I picked up from the works. Really, it's just simple, cheap, water-based acrylic. I'm going to use that to finalise some more details on the back of the ship and give a nice matte finish to the areas that we want to be black. And this was around the back of basically the hull of the ship, I guess, up to where the windows are. Just be really careful with the black, because you don't want to get it over the white, because it'll be hard to clean that up. Remember, the hull doesn't continue around the front area of the ship, so leave that bit white. Now we're going to take the red acrylic and just paint the stripe along the side. After looking at loads of reference images on Google of sort of these type of shipping containers, they always use a combination of sort of red, whites, blacks and blues. So I decided to go with the red stripe down there to separate the two areas. Adds a nice splash of colour. Now that red is going to continue into the interior of the ship here. Now I've used a sort of wet blending technique of reds and blacks here, just using the acrylic paint that I already had there just to fill that in. But the idea here is to give it a sort of natural, sort of weathered kind of grainy look. We've got areas of dark, we've got areas of sort of mid-red, and we've got areas of lighter red. We're kind of going to block in a lot of the shadows and just create a kind of mottled effect. So in between the step there, you can see it would be a lot darker, and then on the top area that's hitting the light there, it would be a lot lighter. So I'm just sort of roughly blending in the blacks with the reds with some water, not being too careful, just getting to a stage where I'm happy with the way it looks. We can then start brightening that up with some more dry brush. So I've started with the base red again, and I'm using a nice flat brush from GW. I think this is the original tank brush that I've still got. Absolutely love it. And I'm just dry brushing the sort of areas that would pick up the most light, just to make the red more vibrant. That includes most of the top area, but also within the kind of walkways between where the shipping crates will go. So you can see the markings on there, which eventually we're going to make with the hazard stripes. But we're just going to keep adding that red until we get to a level that we're happy with. Used sort of methods of stippling, dry brushing, just so you get a more sort of natural pattern and looks a bit more like worn, rusted, metal that's been walked on for loads. And then we can add some more details later. We can then start lightening that further by using some Evil Sun Scarlet. And again, I'm dry brushing this on, but I'm using a thinner brush here, not as large as the tank brush. Because again, as a dry brush, but we just want to pick out the tops of the metal stripping that we've done, add in some sort of more wear and tear around the brighter areas, which is mostly going to be this area at the front of the ship there. Just quickly mention that I actually added some extra bits on the top of the ship there that you can see as well from an old Orc kit. Right, let's get on to some weathering. My favourite GW paint I use a lot of, Rhinox hide. A little bit of sponge. Going to make it into sort of an irregular shape so it's not just square. This is actually one from the kitchen that you use to wash your pots. And we're just going to lightly dab that around all of the sort of edging of the main white area of the ship here. Also around obviously the doors, the railings, up the middle of the stairs, anywhere that would see a lot of wear and tear where there'd be paint chips and stuff like that. We want this ship to look used, not derelict, but we want it to look like it is well used. We're also going to stipple that across the black on the bottom of the ship as well, because it'll start adding some subtle rusting effects to it. Right, I'm now then going to make a wash using Agrex Earthshade, some glaze medium, just to sort of thin that down, and we're going to run that around all of the rivets. Now this is where the gloss varnish will really help pull the pigments into all of the recesses and create a nice finish for us, and make it a lot easier. Now what I've done here along the top there is added a whole line of the ink across the top and then use the brush to drag it down. That way you get kind of like grime and sort of streaks going from the top to the bottom. Don't go overboard with this, but keep it subtle. The reason we've added the glaze medium into the Earthshade is so it's not as opaque. We want it to be quite translucent and build up the layers over time. So you can add add more to one side once it's dried, once you've gone around the whole thing, and sort of build up that grime to a level that you're happy with. I found with the gloss varnish it's really good to just pull it into all the recess, particularly around the door and the rivets where we've got all that extra detail. So just take your time, make it look as realistic as you can, and have fun with it. This is the best bit, in my opinion, weathering it all up. So we've added lots of dirt and grime and wear to the ship. Now we're going to add some rust, and for that we're going to use Riser Rust. Funnily enough, clues in the name. So again, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the Earthshade, but this time the paint's going to be a bit thicker. We don't want it as thin. What we're going to do is just add it in selected areas where the rust would build up a lot more. Again, you can put a little bit at the top sort of here under the railing and then use the brush to sort of pull it down. Wet your brush a little bit more to blend it. You can do a similar technique with oil paints and you'll probably get slightly better results, but I didn't have all that stuff. But there's lots of tutorials online to help you use oil paints to make some really cool effects like this. But I just have the GW set here, so I'm going to use that. But I'm pretty happy with it. I also took the Riser Rust and used the sponge to stipple and sponge around the base of the hull there as well, just to add some sort of more rust to it. And yeah, I think it's looking pretty cool. It's starting to look a little bit more like a used weathered ship now. Right, now a quick and easy way of doing windows. I'm starting off with Cantor Blue. Now I've used this also on the cars from Marvel Crisis Protocol as well. You can see them later in the video. But I'm literally just going to put a blob of Cantor Blue in the top half of the window. I'm then going to wet my brush, clean it out and just keep it damp, and then blend that into the black underneath, so we get a sort of nice gradation from black at the bottom to a sort of deep blue at the top. Take some practice to get this right, but it's only a terrain piece at the end of the day. It doesn't need to be perfect, it's just a little window. We're then going to take Teclis Blue, and with a nice fine brush we're going to add a thin highlight to this area across one corner, so across the top and then down one side. And that will just sort of make it look a bit more like a reflective surface. Then we're going to use White Scar and add a little blob in the corner. And it's really simple, easy way and quick of doing a nice sort of reflective window that isn't see-through essentially. Right, you can see now I've done the hazard stripes on the ship. If you want to know how I did that, check out the last video. It goes into detail about how to mask off and do those kind of things. Now we're actually weathering up the hull itself. We're going to use the Rhinox hide first with the brush and just dab that and stipple that around. I'd already done that on the back of the ship. I'm now just continuing that around the front. We'll do the interior as well as the exterior, just to add some bits of dirt and grime and rust. You can see around the hazard stripes looks pretty cool as well in the deep recesses. We're going to add that all over. We're then going to go to Mornfang Brown. which is a sort of lighter, more reddish brown tone. And we're going to do exactly the same thing, but we're going to try and keep it within the Rhinox hide areas that we'd already done. Just build it up in layers, and you'll start to see some quite simple, good results really easily. Then we'll take the riser rust and do it again, and build it up even more. This time, even less areas than what you did before. So you want to keep it subtle, don't go too overboard. It's quite easy to go overboard with this kind of thing, but I think you'll agree it looks quite nice once it's all done up. There we go. Looking sweet. Rusty. So I want to share with you a nice, quick, easy way of doing paint chip weathering. I've used this on lots of different types of models. It's my kind of go-to method. But what you want to do is take a bright highlight colour that is like a couple of stages lighter than your main colour. So with this, it's the red. We're using Wild Rider Red. We're then going to take a sort of mid brush and just dab it around all of the edging where paint might be chipped away. On here it's obviously going to be like the metal strips along the ladders, across rivets, and we're going to do marks sort of in the centre of areas, but you want to mainly stay clear of big flat areas, just do sort of minor ones here and there. That's the first stage. Then what we do is we take our favourite Rhinox hide again, and what we're going to do with the Rhinox hide is paint inside those areas that we've just established with the lighter highlight colour. And this will give us kind of like a 3D impression. It's a really quick and simple method that you can do, and if you're anyone like me, I have really shaky hands. My highlighting is not the best. Doesn't matter if you shake and get a highlight and mess up a highlight here, because you can then just fill in with the Rhinox hide and make it into these awesome paint chips. You'll see later on that I've done the same technique on a yellow crate for the crane. Right, I wanted to add some details to the interior of the ship. First I painted up those consoles there and just added some silvers and greens just to make them look like funky buttons and stuff. I then went online and searched for all sorts of newspapers. I looked for nautical maps. What you see there is actually a New York harbour map that I found online. I've got some sort of propaganda posters, Daily Bugle newspapers, I've got Time magazines, all related to the Marvel Universe. We've got a clock. And I've got a pin-up calendar as well, which is going to go in the crane. These are just nice little details that are going to go into the interior area of the ship. So literally just resize them on Word, print them out, and you're good to go. Put some Mod Podge, PVA glue, use a damp brush, and just apply your little stickers, or little bits of cut-out paper where you want them to go. You can also kind of fold them up, create sort of creases in them and stuff like that if you don't want to look too perfect. I did that at the front of the ship where we are going to put the maps. So I sort of scrunched them up a bit to make them look sort of worn. I wanted them to sort of hang off the edge a little bit. We also wanted to sort of cover up some of the MDF joins that are there as well. So I used these maps and sort of nautical manifests and things like that just to have scattered around to cover that up. I think you'll agree, it looks pretty awesome. Right, onto the windows. I also painted up a few more details around the ship there that you can see. Picked up these clear PVC sheets off of Amazon for a couple of quid. I just measured out the window area that I wanted to fill in with this sort of acetate. Marked it off on the cutting board, used a sharp knife, and then easily cut the acetate to the required shape. All I'm using to actually stick it in is just some PVA glue. So just make sure you don't get it onto the actual acetate, otherwise it will cloud it. But as you can see there, looks pretty sweet. Now we've actually got some windows in our actual cockpit area of the ship. So just finish that up and do the rest of the windows and it'll look awesome. Here I'm just adding some water effect into the windows, just keeping those horizontal so it doesn't go everywhere. This will just make them look a bit more sort of thicker, a little bit more like windows. Nice and easy to do. Right, on to painting the crane. First up, it was primed in a deep blue. We're now going to sort of layer up some dry brushing. So I'm going to start off with a lighter blue. This is McCrag blue from the GW range, and we're just going to dry brush over the entire thing. Then going to take a lighter tone again. This is Calgar blue, and we're going to continue to dry brush all of the metal areas around and make sure that we pick out all of the highlights we're then going to add the chipping effect. Now this, I see, just like before on the ship, we're just going to add some more paint chips. Now I prioritise these around the kind of base area, you know, around the bottoms of the legs, most of the chipping, because that's where most of the wear and tear, I imagine, would be. You're not going to get much on the top, I wouldn't think. Now I'm going to take some Celestra Grey and paint in all of the white details. I then added some more sponge weathering to the bottom of the crane feet there, where it would get a lot more wear and tear. Then painted the wheels black. And then, after watching Iron Man 3 again, which has an awesome dock scene at the end of it, where all of the Iron Man suits are coming to kill the Mandarin, all of the cranes actually they all had yellow railings, which I assume is like a safety feature, so it stands out amongst the rest of it. I then just weathered those up using the same effects as before, sponging with the Rhinox, and then added some newspapers and bits from our print-offs earlier as well. Now we can finish up the little cab there. There you can see all of the rest of the white details finished up as well. There goes our little back of our cab. I've added a little calendar there, a little manifesto as well, kind of little sort of things that you would find in that kind of area. I've added in all of the windows, and then finished it up by sticking the back on. Here you can see an extra little bit that came with the kit, which is like a radioactive shipping container with all sorts of hazardous material in it. That again has had the same paint chipping treatment as the ship. And what I'm going to do is going to use this, like, it's actually hanging wire for hanging pictures, and just wind that up and super glue that up so it looks like the actual cab crane there is transporting the radioactive material. Might be cool as a mission objective in a game. Right, onto the actual water effects. So here I've got a selection of different aquarium plants that look kind of like seaweed. Obviously they start off quite bright green, so I've just used some Aphonio Camo Shade to add some wash on these to make them a little bit more dark and sort of seaweedy. Now we can start applying them to our seabed area. I've also added some Woodland Scenics kind of driftwood. I guess these are kind of used for all sorts of terrain needs, whether it's at the base of a jungle or doing a base of a seabed like this, you'd get all sorts of driftwood down there. I've added different types of grass tufts. I've used some super glue to stick down some of the aquarium plants. I want to try and make this as realistic as possible, so I've concentrated all of the weeds and the seaweed and stuff at this end of the seabed, because this is where the vegetation would build up. If you're using like the big long leaves like you see there, I've tried to make them go in a certain direction, as if the water's pulling them all in one way. I've then added some lichen, some more seaweed, and this is what it looks like once it's all built up. Now onto the scary part, pouring the resin. So I'm using some CFS polyester clear resin as recommended by Luke APS on his channel, and go and check that out. I'm going to just pour a little bit at first just to make sure it doesn't react with all of the paints and stuff in there, because this is a solvent based resin. Just measure it out as it says on the instructions on the back. Make sure you get this part right, because you don't want to mess it up, guys. So I'm using just some digital scales, some clear pint glasses that I got out of Asda, then mixed it up with the two parts as instructed. I'm going to give that a really good stir to make sure that those two parts are completely mixed together. I've used just a lollipop stick for this. You can use a tongue depressor or something, but make sure to give that a good stir around for at least 2 to 3 minutes, so you know that they're completely mixed together and you won't have any issues when it sets. Now I'm adding some drops of Aphonio Camo Shade and Agrax Earth Shade to the mix, just to give the water the kind of dirtiness that I want. Now less is more here. You want to add it in stages, don't add loads in at once, because obviously if you add too much you can't go back and you've wasted some resin. This stuff isn't cheap, so make sure you do it right. Now I'm just going to pour into the area here. So I've done it up this end first, and I'm just going to let a bit up here set before I do the main area at the back, because if it does cause a problem or doesn't set right, it's not too tricky to reset all of this. Just make sure your area is level, and then just pour in, your resin and keep building it up. Now, after much advice on the wargaming and terrain forums, I've gone for lots of thin pours, so it will take time, especially on a pour this deep. So just keep at it, wait the designated amount of time between each pour. I did at least 48 hours between each one, and I just built it up over time. Now, I bought a case of 5 kilos of this resin, and it got up to this point. I was hoping that the resin would go a lot further. I was hoping to get it up to closer to the water jetty there, but I didn't want to add too much weight. I'm happy with it. Let's just go from there. It's going to get too much heavier if we start adding more. Right, let's add the ripple effect. This is just done with some simple Mod Podge. So make sure you've got the gloss finish so it dries clear and gloss. Pour it on, and then with a straw, blow the hell out of it to create that effect.
So guys, doing the ripples on the water effect was the last step that I took for this part of the build. Really happy with the results. Following this, there's going to be some nice beautiful shots of the finished layout, at least this half of the board. Next time we're going to finish the other half, which contains all of the shipping containers and the big distribution centre and all of the inside and interior of that. So I need a name for the distribution centre company. So anyone's got any ideas of what sort of company name might exist within the Marvel Universe to sort of fit it all together, then do let us know in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then please do give us a like, give us the old thumbs up, and consider subscribing to see the next part when it eventually drops. I promise it won't be as long as this one. Anyway, a big thank you to the Wargaming community on Facebook, the Wargaming Terrain community in particular, who have been real help in doing some of the sections on this. So really happy. Couldn't have asked for a better community, really. So thanks, guys, and thanks again to TT Combat for sending us these awesome kits. So let's have a look at what it all has come together to look like. See you next time, guys. Bye.